the former president, Donald Trump. We'll talk about it with Jim Avila and Michael Shore.
Can I just throw out a piece of not breaking news, but like some new information as we move toward the Michael Shore, Jim Avila segment? I'll just want to tell you that the former president is complaining about the time and the cost being spent on the legal battles now, and he's calling on the Supreme Court to intercede. That's all.
Well, I mean, that's his court.
Supreme Court to step in and say, yeah, you can't do this to him.
Yeah, call in the cavalry.
Yeah.
Tony, do you have that Barr stuff I sent you? Maybe it's worth a second or two watching this. But then I have a bit of, I think, some harsh medicine and realities about the Trump trial. And I'd be curious to know whether you agree with me. But I think there's a serious, coarse truth to the Trump trial situation and all of the charges that have collected around this president. And, I think they're all legitimate, okay? But there are some realities concerning Trump, concerning what will happen and how this country and Trump fit together. And I'll share those with you in a moment. But here is a bit of Barr. Again, I was just watching this interview, and you know how I feel about Barr. I think he carried the water for Trump in the last administration. I think he covered up a lot of things. It's despicable what he did with the Mueller report and how he essentially varnished over it, held it back, and came out and made a statement about what was in the Mueller report. And his statement bore no relationship to what was actually in the Mueller report. That said, it's instructive. And of course, now he's trying to wash his name with all of these appearances. And there's a thanks again to Enid. She says, thanks for the tip about Coachella Valley coffee. It is so good. Here's your tip. We enjoyed our first cup this morning. I love it. Good deal. Yeah. Drink it in good health. And a big shout out. So I'll share my thoughts in a moment. But first, here's a little bit of Barr and his conversation on CNN.
I think it's a legitimate case. I think, unlike the document case, it's going to have issues of proof. It's a more complicated case. And I think there are some downsides to it. I think there were reasons not to bring it. I've said before, I'm a little concerned about the slippery slope of criminalizing legitimate political activity. I'm worried about moving in that direction. And I'm also worried about bringing this case and the divisiveness that it will bring by highlighting the double standard. Because at the same time this case is being brought, the department appears to have dropped the ball on the Hunter Biden investigation. It's going to be very hard to persuade many Republicans that this isn't political.
We'll talk about the Hunter Biden investigation, but I mean, when you do look at the indictment, do you think it's something you would have brought?
I think, I don't know if I would have approved the indictment, but in the sense I may have exercised discretion and not gone forward with the case. I'm also concerned about having this case going on during the election and diverting people's attention from the issue.
Stop right now, Tony. I just want to speak. Everything he's said so far really speaks to the fact that I wouldn't have brought this case because of the political environment in America and because of the rancor associated with bringing this case to the public, to an already divided public. I bring this case and and then he mentioned the double standard. And by the way, there is a bit of a double standard, I want to say, and please hear me out, on the Hunter Biden thing. The Hunter Biden thing is, can't hold a candle to what Trump did. Trump attempted a coup. The two cannot be mentioned in the same sentence. That said, I do think that Joe Biden, Hunter Biden's dad, behaved inappropriately, unethically, when he showed up on these calls, even though he didn't do anything on the calls. I mean, it's said by the key witnesses, all he did was just show up and go, hey, how are you? Yep, glad you've met Hunter, blah, 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 good luck. The weather's a bit humid. I'm going to take a walk out and, have a tuna sandwich for lunch. It was literally almost that mundane a conversation that Biden had. But in showing up in those conversations, it helps create the illusion that was talked about with Hunter, having access and that if you do business with Hunter, you'll have access to me. Again, now, shouldn't be mentioned in the same breath at all as a guy who tried to overturn a democracy, overturn an election, and remain in power. Cannot even conceive of the two being in the same universe. But to Barr and to Republicans, they check off on that, right? They're looking for reasons to essentially let their guy, the GOP, leading GOP candidate, to let him off the hook. Okay, but that's what that all was, I don't know if I would bring the case. I don't know. This is a tough time in America right now. So none of those things have to do with justice. They all have to do with the atmosphere in the country. Here's a little bit more. Go ahead, Tony.
I think that it's not an abuse. The Department of Justice is not acting to weaponize the department by proceeding against the president for a conspiracy to subvert the electoral process.
Which is what Trump's attorneys are saying. And they're also saying that he was just exercising his First Amendment right here. Do you think that's a valid argument in your view?
No, I really don't think that's a valid argument because, as the indictment says, they're not attacking his First Amendment right. He can say whatever he wants. He can even lie. He can even tell people that the election was stolen when he knew better. But that does not protect you from entering into a conspiracy. All conspiracies involve speech, and all fraud involves speech. So, free speech doesn't give you the right to engage in a fraudulent conspiracy.
The other thing that they're arguing, including John Lauro, Trump's new attorney, to me last night, was that they were simply asking the former Vice President Mike Pence to pause on the counting of votes. Mike Pence pushed back on that today, said that's not what they were asking him to do.
Let's be clear on this point. It wasn't just that they asked for a pause. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, which would have resulted in the issue being turned over to the House of Representatives, and literally chaos would have ensued.
How strong of a witness do you think he'll be against Trump if he's called?
Vice President? I think he'll be a very strong witness. He has the highest integrity. He's behaved with dignity and propriety all the way through this.
You agree that they weren't just asking him to pause the counting of the votes, they were asking him to overturn the election?
I wasn't around, but from what I read in the indictment, there was a discussion, and the president himself stressed that he would prefer him just to accept the votes in the panels that were pro-Trump, that it wasn't a question of just buying time.
Yeah. The other argument that we're hearing is about who Trump was listening to at this time. Trump's attorney, John Lauro, said this of John Eastman.
Mr. Trump had the advice of counsel, Mr. Eastman, who was one of the most respected constitutional scholars in the United States.
This is Trump's
giving
attorney.
him advice and guidance.
He's citing John Eastman as this constitutional scholar, but we know in the indictment, it says Trump was ignoring your advice, that of other senior Justice Department officials, Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, the director of national intelligence. Is it a credible defense to say he was just listening to John Eastman?
I don't think that dog is going to hunt, as you say. First, as to people who had some knowledge of whether or not there was fraud, everyone was telling him that the election was not stolen by fraud. And then as to the issue of what he could do legally at that point, he went through all the lawyers, he wouldn't listen to all the lawyers in the department in various departments or the White House that had those responsibilities.
Yeah, send me a lawyer who will agree with me.
He would search for a lawyer who would give him the advice he wanted. But I'm not even sure you would characterize what Eastman said as advice. It'd be interesting to see, but I interpret some of what he was saying essentially was, well, it's unclear here, and you can make this argument. I'm not saying the courts would accept it and so forth. And you act on that at your own hazard. Also, I don't think this defensive advice of counsel is going to go forward, because I think the president would have to get on the stand and subject himself to cross-examination in order to raise that, and he'd also have to waive attorney-client privilege.
And what would happen if he got on the stand?
I think it would not come out very well for him.
Do you think it would hurt him?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Why do you think that?
Well, because I think he'd be subject to very skilled cross-examination, and I doubt he remembers all the different versions of events he's given over the last few years.
Do you think he knew that he lost the election?
This last question.
Do I personally believe that? Yeah, at first I wasn't sure, but I have come to believe that he knew well that he had lost the election. And now, what I think is important is the government has assumed the burden of proving that. The government, in their indictment, takes the position that he had actual knowledge that he had lost the election and the election wasn't stolen through fraud. And they're going to have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which is a high bar, of course.
That's a high bar. Now, that leads me to believe that we're only seeing a tip of the iceberg on this.
You think Jack Smith has more?
Oh, yes. I would believe he has a lot more. And that's one of the things that impressed me about the indictment. It was very spare. And there are a lot of things he could have said in there. And I think there's a lot more to come. And I think they have a lot more evidence as to President Trump's state of mind.
Okay. So that's a bit of Barr. I wanted you to hear a bunch of that because I think there's a lot there. I will say this about the thing that's often talked about. There's a high bar and, they've still got to make their case and all this kind of thing. I was reading a piece in Slate early this morning that suggested, yeah, it's a high bar, but, this guy, Trump, and then I'm going to get to the bigger issue in a moment. But let's just talk about the legal part now. Many analyses incorrectly describe the situation confronting these guys, Giuliani and the rest, as flip, that they didn't file an indictment, so now they've been placed on notice. Those analyses are wrong. They go through all of these different sort of talking head type points that we hear a lot about. But as it pertains to Trump, I thought the interesting thing that might relate to many of you, meaning it might land with many of you, are the statistics. And the statistics are pretty damning. There is only 2% of federally charged defendants risk going to trial and force the government to meet that burden, the one we're talking about. And those who take that risk, of the 2% who actually go to trial against the government, 90% are convicted, notwithstanding that burden. So, again, I find the case, it would seem, so damning that it's so overwhelming in evidence and it's so lean. It hasn't been cluttered with Giuliani and Eastman, etc. They'll have them, but it's likely that they're concentrating on Trump for a reason. Except for cases involving a trial defendant's confession, the evidence establishing Donald Trump's criminal intent is as overwhelming as I have seen in my 40-plus years in the courtroom. Second, as pointed out before, none of the 6, quote, experts that he allegedly relied upon are likely to be available to testify. So the only way the former president can rebut the mountain of evidence establishing that he knew he lost the election and that his attempts to overturn the result were illegal is to testify in his own defense and somehow convince a jury it was an innocent mistake. So I read that this morning and I thought, wow, it's a damning case against Trump. We hear about the burden. That's from Robert Katzenberg. And I now want to get to a bigger point, and I will bring it up to Shore and Avila as well. To me, it's all about politics now. Trump has taken in all of the indictments, he's digested them, and he's using them to fundraise, and he's using them to gain increased popularity, to have his GOP band of crazies, those who, also want to sign on to denying election results or whatever, and those who just believe in this cult of Trump, they all coalesce around all of these different indictments that are coming, right? They are fuel, if you will, for that brand of crazy. So another indictment, to be honest, and we talked about this a bit yesterday, does fall into the category of another indictment. Now, I can remind you, and others can remind you, that this is the big one. This is a guy who tried to engineer a coup. But that's lost in the wash of, yeah, but it's another indictment. They're out to get him. And okay. Now you can say, yeah, but that only lands that way, out to get him, with whatever, 40% of the people or 35% of the people, with his base plus 10, we'll call it. I see it all as politics. I see Trump as a squad leader in that GOP actually making a move toward winning the presidency. I see Biden as a somewhat damaged president, probably more damaged than he should be. He's gotten a bunch of stuff done, but the left feels he hasn't gotten enough done, okay? The left feels you should have gotten minimum wage. You should have gone for Medicare for all. The left has its own agenda that they feel, legalizing marijuana, whatever it might be. The left feels that Biden has let them down, okay? He hasn't been as left as they want. I'll give you an environmental thing. For all the talk about electric vehicles, for all the talk about these environmental things that are transformational as far as the Biden administration is concerned, they greenlight all of these projects, these drilling projects, in pristine land, in the same way that the Trump administration did. Maybe not quite to the same level, but to a disturbing level. So you add that on top of the other things, the left is disappointed. So you got the left disappointed with Biden, faced with the prospect of Trump. So the only thing you hope is that they go, well, we certainly don't want Trump, so we're going to go for Biden. But what is very likely is that they don't show up at all. This has been the problem, Democrats to rally those voters. So there is a scenario. You add a third-party candidate to it, and you've got yourself a real problem. I mean, I think, but again, we're going to hear from Jim Avila and we're going to hear from Michael Shore, and there you're going to hear opinions that will chill you out. They'll make you feel as though, no, Biden's going to win again, and Trump will not win. So we'll get to that. But my position is that this all comes down to politics. If Trump can win the presidency, and I don't know, there's a shot, 50-50 maybe, 60-40, how do you want to say it? And I know, well, look, he's the kiss of death. Look at the midterms. Okay. But if the anti-Biden stuff can get just enough momentum to suppress turnout, it's a very slim margin. And the aggrieved, victimized presidency, the Trump presidency, which was, beset by all of these libs going after him and going after that administration, they could ride to power again. It's scary. I mean, Steve Bannon and Miller and all of those, that band of radical crazies, I don't want them near the White House on a tour. And I think there are scenarios by which Trump could win. And now to the legal part then. If he wins the presidency, all of this gets erased. That's the bottom line. So Trump's only lifeline, I think, I get it. He's going to delay, but eventually it'll come to trial. Eventually there will be something adjudicated. Now, that eventually won't, based on David Katz's predictions, come before the election. But when Trump actually prevails in the election, should it happen, it all goes away. Karen says the young people may show up to vote in larger numbers because of the right refusing to help with education debt, et cetera. Yeah, and the et cetera, I would say on Karen, and I agree with that, is this Roe v. Wade thing.
Reproductive rights, yeah.
Reproductive rights, huge. And reproductive rights screamed during the midterms. Screamed and affected the outcome. So it's very possible that constant reminders associated with that will bring all the boys to the yard, to the poll yard. Mindy says, if things get screwed up for Biden now, Trump will wind up president. Do not rock the boat with a different Democrat. Yeah. Yeah, there's Sandy saying, also the abortion issue has inspired a lot more women to vote blue. Women don't like having their rights taken away, nor should they. Yeah.
I got schooled last week. We'll see if they say the same thing to you. From Michael Schur and Jim Avila saying, listen, and they had numbers to back up what they're saying. They're saying Trump's approval rating is very low. That, and as was just mentioned, there's a lot more younger people voting. It'll be a different electorate. And so Trump has really, even if he gets the GOP nod, no chance of becoming president again. But I just feel like, and I stand by it, that when you take your eye off him or you discount him is when he sneaks up on you and sneaks right in, and America can't afford it.
Well, we have an anxiety about Trump for sure, which is the same anxiety you have after the horror film killer is stabbed through the heart and all of a sudden comes back to life because it turns out his heart's on the other side or something, like whatever it is.
They're drowned in the bathtub and then they take the breath. Yeah.
So we have that. We all share that anxiety. I agree. They do come to the party, Avila and Schur, with statistics and with experience. I'd suggest, though, that this is a new world, and this politics isn't informed by all those numbers of the past and even those general electoral leanings of the past. I mean, the leanings of the electorate, okay? So I share the anxiety, and I just told you, I think Trump's got a real chance to win. I really do. Hey, Biden isn't exactly, knocking down the charts with great approval ratings. So don't tell me about how Trump's got bad ratings. Biden, as I've just told you, I don't think he should have approval ratings as low as he has, but in the new America, he does. And if they can, and again, what's going to happen is the narrative is going to be all about Trump and his trials and how he's being victimized by a weaponized Justice Department. And yeah, I get it. Not everybody's going to believe that. But all you have to do is suppress the turnout, and anything could happen. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.